Well, welcome back to the podcast, everybody. You're listening to In the Company of Charity podcast. My name is Sister Liz, and I am here with Sister Elizabeth, my good friend and co host. Welcome, dear sister.
Oh, sister, hello. How are you?
We're all surviving Snowmageddon. We can't have an
Yeah,
episode without the weather report.
I
Um,
know.
we had a major storm that swept much of the country, including both of our areas. And so I don't know about you, but we stayed inside and actually did a retreat day
Absolutely.
as silence. It was lovely.
Oh my gosh, no, we watched a couple of movies. I have to admit, we had a great time. Sister Judy made chili, which was really exciting because she also included biscuits, and so we had a nice kind of cozy winter day here. We got probably 10 or 11 inches here in St. Louis. I don't know what you got, but it came down and
7 plus sleet. Lots of
yeah,
sleet. So,
wow. Oh, sweet.
yeah,
Yeah, ours is
conditions are
nice and
not great.
fluffy. Ours is nice and fluffy snow. Yeah.
But yeah, so crazy times, but we have a great episode for everybody today. Little trigger warning. This is about the death penalty, and amazing that we are still talking about this, and that this is still an issue that Catholics need to speak up about and get behind. But Heidi Moore is the guest, and just a powerful episode by someone who's extremely intelligent on this issue and a great storyteller as well. And I think, for me at least, this highlights the need to respect the dignity of every human being, and every human life is sacred, no matter who a person is, what they've done. The first should always be to respect them and to treat them as we would want to be treated, as the Lord has commanded us. Your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Well, this was an amazing interview. I have to say she's a delight to meet. She's just a very gregarious and charismatic person. Um, and so all of that gets melted into this very difficult topic. She's very knowledgeable and very passionate about this, and she's kind of come into this work. Heidi has had a life that has created for her empathy, both for people who are victims, but also people who are perpetrators. And I think what I really appreciated about her was, just as you were saying in the beginning, that she brings to her work a balance of dignity and respect to everyone she meets, and sees that situations people may find themselves in are not one-off instances. They're often long periods of time of poverty or injustice or the lack of due process throughout their lives and she just sees in each person the potential for goodness in the face of maybe very difficult life situations. And I think that really speaks to um, one, to her Catholic faith. Really helps her to see that the need for the ability to be redeemed. We can't really
Mm,
take this away from people, and when we execute somebody, we take away from them the ability to find their own redemption and make right with God all that they can. And that's not for us to decide. That's a relationship with their God that has to be honored and respected as well. I just I found her very powerfully um, grounded and well-rounded in her conversation about the death penalty and about her work, how she came to that work. And I just think everyone's going to really enjoy the episode, but also be really challenged by it. This is it's a controversial topic for sure.
sure.
But I think you can't read the Catechism of the Catholic Church and have any other um, belief than that the death penalty is not of God. It is not. Um, it's not right. So, but I
It
know not
calls
everyone agrees with that.
Right. It calls to mind for me, the story of the good thief on the cross, who made poor choices, obviously evil choices, and he says, Jesus, remember me. And the Lord's response was, this day you will be with me in paradise. And we've all of us have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And there is not one thing that we have done or can do that is unrepentable. We can always find mercy in his gaze, and turn and come to the Lord no matter what we've done. And we should allow for that for everyone. Um, and so we invite you to prayerfully listen to this episode, and just to be touched by the stories and the encouragement that the Lord is leading us to a more just society, and that He just loves us. He loves every single one of us. So God bless you guys. Enjoy the episode.
I would like to introduce Heidi Moore to the podcast. Heidi, we're delighted to have you here today.
Thank you, sister. I appreciate being asked to just have a conversation with you.
Yeah, I've really been looking forward to it. I really appreciated, I heard you, as I said, on the Precious Blood Fathers podcast that you were doing for the Jubilee of Hope, right? And they really were talking to you about, or he was talking to you about your work within the death penalty, to abolish the death penalty. You also mentioned that you were a convert to the faith. And in our recent conversations, you also mentioned that you knew Vincentians. And so I said, this is providential. Of course she needs to be with us. So talk to us about any and all of those things.
So I'll start, I'm not just a convert to Catholicism. I was baptized as an adult at, we call it College Church, but St. Francis Xavier here in St. Louis. So my Christianity was embraced as an adult officially in my late 30s, with a full baptism into not just Catholicism, but Father Bueller said, "You're the world's newest Christian," right as he baptized me. And it really brought this whole global community right then and there in a way that I hadn't even considered that.
Yeah, that's just fascinating, because as a cradle Catholic, I've often thought about, what is it like to receive communion for the first time as an adult? Or what is it like to hear the teachings of the church and to see the traditions of the church played out? I've known them since forever, and I've often wondered, what is that like?
Yeah, it's amazing, because I was not raised in any faith. My parents had been baptized when maybe I was young in a river, Southern Missouri. There's lots of Baptists, Southern Baptists. We did not attend church, and prayer wasn't something we did in the household. When we went to families at Christmas, there was a prayer done before Christmas where people were kind of laughing and giggling, but nothing where you took things seriously. And I was raised upper middle class, but I would be scared to pray, because I would be scared if someone saw me praying, they would make fun of me. And every so often, she had some problems, and she would be like, okay, we're going to go to church. And we'd go for a little bit, or I'd go to a vacation Bible school, but nothing where I never knew what was going on. So I just stayed confused. And so as an adult, I knew there was something larger than me. I wasn't quite sure. I would use the word atheist, and then someone taught me agnostic. And I was like, yeah. And I went through, I knew there was this power in this being, something larger. And I moved to St. Louis in 2005. And I started seeing, as I left the Department of Corrections, and we'll come back around to that because it's really relevant. I was headhunted by a Notre Dame sister who worked for the Society of St. Vincent de Paul Council office. And they headhunted me out of the Department of Corrections because I was someone who tried to help the men and not put obstacles in their way. And I do speak about men because that has been the predominant work that I have done, is with men. And I realized Catholics were doing the work. I'm not saying other faiths don't, but if no one if you've not been in St. Louis and experienced how Catholic the city actually is and how social service the Catholics are in this city. And I realized that the Catholics were at times keeping the prisons open. And I mean that in Jefferson City, as Missouri's gone through different budget crises, there was often sisters that would go into various prisons and just sit so the men could have treatment themselves and so they could have recreation. And anyway, I was working at St. Vincent de Paul, the council office here in St. Louis, and they were talking about walking with the poor. And they taught the way of you go into the house as a Vincentian and you don't just pay an electric bill, but you assess, are there food? What else is going on in the home so that we can help the whole person and whole family.
Wow, you really learned the Vincentian charism.
Yeah,
That's great.
Yeah, it was
out
just
to the council.
yeah, it was amazing at that time, the leadership that was there. And I decided my ex-husband, but he was my sponsor. And he had been baptized as a child, but had not been practicing for a while. And I decided that, all these people, one thing that amazed me about Catholicism, right, is not just the forgiveness, because that's what makes sense. Growing up in a rural community where you would see, well, that's a preacher, but he's drinking a hot toddy when it's cold at my parents' house, but things didn't make sense to me. And Catholics didn't seem to be as hypocritical. And I'm not trying to be offensive to other religions, but Catholics drink, and that's not, no one's embarrassed about it. You have forgiveness and reconciliation. And then I realized across the world, everyone was doing the same readings. And the power of collective prayer just amazed me.
It's always amazed me as well that you can go anywhere in the world and you're going to get the same readings and the same prayers and the same liturgy is the same.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so at the moment, though, that I was baptized, it was 2012, and I was the only adult. I was the only baptism. I wasn't the only confirmation, but the only baptism. And when Father Bueller said, "You're the world's newest Christian." And there's a photo with, it's just lit around me, almost like a halo. I'm not comparing myself to an angel, but I remember my soul becoming lighter at the moment of baptism. And years earlier in 2006, my stepdad was Catholic. So my mom put on her paperwork. She was Catholic at the hospital in Springfield, Missouri. And they came in to give her last rites. She was dying. And I watched them give her last rites. And I watched the relaxation over her entire body and the moment of peace, not even understanding what any of that meant, but I knew whatever had occurred. And I guess it's the opposite only at the beginning when I was baptized. I just felt this cleanse, this lift, that anything I had done or said, that everything was okay and going to be okay.
Wow. It's amazing. I think Catholics, we understand reconciliation to be that, to come out of a confessional, right? That reconciling experience of penance and reconciliation, to come out to feel like I am new again, that I have been forgiven for all the things I've said, but that God had already forgiven me before I got there. Right. And that God's message is to just continue, go out there and love and be in peace. As you're talking, I feel like you're converting me all over again, like deepening my understanding. It's so refreshing and so delightful to have that experience, to talk to someone else who has seen it in such fresh eyes, because I think some of us can get a little staid. We see the way things, aren't going right, but to remind ourselves that it's a deep, rich, and abiding faith, and the practice and tradition, the universality, Catholic meaning universal, is so powerful. It's really powerful. Thank you for sharing all this.
Yeah.
That's great. So how has that kind of moved you in the work that you do now? Or had that already started?
So I had already started. I knew from a young age, I'm a first generation college student. I was raised upper middle class, but my family, my dad and mom were married and divorced to each other 4 times.
Wow.
And then he remarried his first wife after 26 years. So my dad was the stable in my life. And I mentioned earlier, I was raised on an exotic animal farm. So we had camels and Sicilian donkeys, which are the donkeys with the cross on the back. We had sheep. And I say that because we often had the nativity scenes. And since it's, a few days out from Christmas and the nativity scenes are around, I was often, we'd have the camel on the Christmas parade or the nativity scene. But I always wanted to work with people who others had tossed aside. Mm-hmm. My mom asked me at a young age, why are you always with the underdog? Why are you always sticking up for the underdog? And I had no answer. I had been sexually abused as a child, and that stopped about 4 the first time. And it was a family member, not my father. I always make sure and say that. And I was not the only victim of his. And I'm sure that put me in ways I didn't know, because when you're 4, you don't really have a sense of life before that. But I knew I always wanted to help people. And prisoners was where we had a federal prison in the hometown, or right near hometown. And I just always thought, prisoners, we just lock them away and throw away the key. What goes on behind those walls? And when I finished my master's, I started working at probation and parole, and I took a job at Potosi Correctional Center. So this was 2003, not Catholic yet. And I was the parole officer at the prison where we house men under a death sentence. I was the only parole officer for the whole prison. So there's at least a couple of the guys right now living with a death sentence that I was their parole officer. And I chose that job intentionally because I knew I would get the broadest range of experience, and I wanted to change the system. I didn't know how yet, but I knew that you had to learn things before you could come in and change realistically. And as a probation and parole officer, then I was at Potosi. My mom got sick and died. Gas got expensive. And then eventually I was headhunted by the Catholics. And we worked prisoner reentry for about 8.5, 9 years. And again, I often took the men that no one else wanted. 49 years in prison, 43 years in prison, 36 years in prison. And you realize that they have no one but you, often not even family. And the men in prison often felt hopeless. And I would go into, even as an intern, I'd go into the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri, and the guys would say, Miss Moore, what'd you have for lunch? And I would feel guilty. And finally, one of them said, Miss Moore, don't feel guilty. You're free. That's how I'm finding out about food and things. I ask you those types of questions. So my area of research, actually my PhD program, was sex offenders and deviants and how the laws aren't making us any safer. And when I would interview the men for my dissertation, which was during COVID, I interviewed 75 men on the Missouri registry. And often the men would have questions. And I'd say, I'll answer them afterward. I don't want to impact the research I am collecting by my own story. And after I answer your questions, if you decide you don't want to participate, I will pull you from the participation. And I was honest with them when they would say, why are you doing this work? The laws we have now would not have protected me or my family. And that's the way it mostly is. There's a big misunderstanding about sex offenders. And that's how it is, though, with a lot of people who end up in prison. One of my professors taught from a book, The Rich Get Richer, The Poor Get Prison. And this was the early 2000s. And then he taught about race towards the back end of that. He's teaching you to think about poverty, and people can't afford lawyers, and people can't afford experts, and they lose their job because they're locked up, and everything that we now know in 2025 that happens to people who get involved in the criminal justice system. That was fairly new in the early 2000s for people to be talking about regularly.
Yeah, it's amazing. 5 years, what can happen,
Right.
and what we can begin to understand. And we can only hope that as we learn, we continue to learn more, and that we're
Yeah.
not afraid to learn more,
Yeah.
and that we can adjust the way we think and the way we see people and the way in which we understand their situations.
Right. And most people don't realize that most people, in my experience, that support capital punishment, it's not who they think are being executed, are not the ones being executed. I mean, yeah, occasionally we get someone like that. But for the most part, when Late Shockley was executed October 14th of this year, it was all circumstantial evidence. There was no eyewitness, no forensics. There was over 130 other witnesses with the same opportunity and motive. That is not who we're taught as a society that we're executing. We're taught, well, it's the Timothy McVeighs, it's the Ted Bundys for those that are my age, or Jeffrey Dahmers. You're not taught that it's someone who there's no evidence, who ended up having to pay for lawyers because the public defenders had to pull out for a conflict of interest. And you think, wow, this, and as I was telling Lance's story to people, they were like, why is he being executed? I'm like, because that's the law. He was found guilty. And in Missouri and Indiana, if a jury is hung, so a jury decides guilt or innocence, then the next phase is life without parole or death, the only two options.
Wow.
And in Missouri and Indiana, if you are undecided as a jury, the judge, I call it dealer's choice, the judge gets to decide, does he want to give the person death or life without parole?
Wow.
Texas doesn't do that. Oklahoma doesn't do that. We're not supposed to do that. It's supposed to default to life without parole.
Yeah, when there's no unanimous decision.
Correct.
So all of that has led you now to be the executive director of the Missourians to abolish the death penalty.
Yes.
How does that happen?
Province, right? I mean, I had taken a job after my PhD that paid well, that I could do. When I decided to get a PhD in public policy, I have family members who have been incarcerated. I have a cousin who did 21 years on a sex case, who paroled to me after. My ex-husband, I have 6 other family members that have been in and out of state prison. My cousin's back in federal for 8 or 9 years on a nonviolent. I had seen that side. I had worked as an employee. I had walked prisoner reentry with men who you're explaining why soy is now a milk and cashew is now a milk because they've been in prison for the past 30 years. And they're like, why are there so many milk selections?
That's crazy.
And I think I always like to hone in on the milk because I think it's something we can all appreciate, from going to the grocery store and just having a few brands to now there's so many selections of milk and non-milk products. And realizing that the men would get me Mother's Day cards and they were older than me and they had no one but me or those we brought into their lives. And the service component called me so much that when this job opened, I am so grateful that they selected me. And as I often say, I would be even more grateful tomorrow if I did not have a job because Missouri abolished the death penalty.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen tomorrow. Congress, or our legislative session doesn't start till the 7th of January. But I would be very happy. But I'm so grateful to have this job to try to help others understand why we should not be allowing our state to commit murder in our name and our country. But right now, I focus on Missouri. The feds have the death penalty. I realize for me, I cannot become overwhelmed by the big war of the social justice.
Sure.
I have to stay focused on the mission of abolishing the death penalty in Missouri and providing support and help for those that live under a death sentence however we can. The number of Missourians and or Catholics that have said to me, Missouri has the death penalty? Yeah, we're 3rd in the country.
Wow.
On executions. We had one this year, which was tough. I talked about Lance earlier. and a lot of Catholics got involved. We had hope this year because Missouri has a Catholic governor for the first time since like the 80s or 90s. I had it in my notes earlier, but it's been a long time since we've had a Catholic governor in Missouri. And we were hoping that Lance's case was an easy case for him to say, there's no evidence. Let me just let this guy live out his life in prison. He's doing prison ministry. He had a shoe ministry. If those that don't know, the St. Louis Review did articles about him. And I believe the National Review as well had an article or two on Lance Shockley. And that he was not Catholic, but the ministry he was doing and the Kairos inside and the work that he did. A lot of Catholics had been changed and impacted by Lance, and they didn't know he was going to be sentenced to die until he had a sentence. He wasn't in prison saying he was innocent. And so we have to be willing to talk about it. And in this time of political divisiveness in this country, the death penalty is a bipartisan issue. We have Republicans that sponsor our legislation to abolish the death penalty or close that judicial loophole that I discussed a minute ago. Largely Catholics who are true pro-life, but this is not a Democrat, Republican, a blue-red issue.
Isn't that really the core, too, of the understanding why the Catholic Church teaches what it teaches, right? We're not, as you say, we're not flaming liberals where we just want everything to happen.
Right.
But the Holy Fathers have said, Pope John Paul II said, if it is possible to contain and protect the people, then this is unnecessary and wrong. It's wrong. But that was like a nuance of this, was if you can't contain them. Well, we know that we can.
Right.
As you said, we know that there are prison systems in which those who are guilty, as you say, or those who should be, can be there for life.
Yeah.
That death is not the answer.
Correct.
Ever.
Well, and it shouldn't be. And in states where you have the death penalty, the murder rates are higher. In states where you have the death penalty and active executions, cops are more likely to be shot. Now, I don't know if that's because Shane, I think it's Colburn, he wrote a book called Executing Grace. And for anyone interested, it takes a lot of biblical arguments in support of the death penalty and breaks them down.
Sure. Yeah, we can post that on the podcast
but
notes.
One of the things he says is the Bible Belt is now the death belt. And prisons are not a fun place to try to, people change their life and they make it the best that they can. But it's not like they're sitting there at the Hilton or they're even out here in the city on a Saturday night. Like, they're in prison. They have count. They have someone watching them. When you have hugged a man who did 13 years in prison and he flinched because he had not been touched outside of a strip search, you recognize that these are not people who are in there just having the time of their life and waiting for the bar to close down and, And I think we have a wrong impression of what prison actually is based upon people who think we are too soft on prisoners. But I also believe that we have to treat people with respect and dignity. And as we are killing our own, not just citizens of this country or Missouri, but another human. Mm-hmm. And we're doing it in a way that is not out of a life or death to protect ourselves or our loved one. And again, I'm not saying that it's okay to murder, but I am saying people always do these exceptions. And so, I mean, if someone broke in and you defending your home and things, that's one thing. Their death certificates after an execution say homicide.
Wow, I didn't realize that. That's very telling.
So the state is admitting.
Yeah. And
the people who are making these decisions are half a state away. And so they're actually doing this murder with a broad stroke of a pen, and their hands are as clean as can be, like a mafia boss or something.
Yeah, yeah.
And to me, that's where I think of like the Caesar, right? Like, go get him. I'm not, and we've brought back gas where people are suffering. Firing squads have been approved in more states than they were. South Carolina's firing squad execution this year missed the man's heart and went into other organs, according to the autopsy.
Wow. I can't even believe we're like having this kind of conversation.
Yes. The Secrets of the Killing State is a book that just came out this year by Karina Lane, Lain. She's a historical law professor who said, why do we keep getting executions wrong? She doesn't take a side pro or against. Like, you know me, I'm against it, right?
Pretty clear.
But she doesn't take a stance. She wanted to see, why are we so bad? We can put dogs to sleep. We can make loved ones. I had 2 family members die under hospice care. They were made very comfortable until the end so that they could pass in a comfortable state. She asked this question, did we intentionally make it where the men, I say men again, the majority, the men look at peace for the witnesses, but autopsies show we're waterboarding them to death.
Wow. Yeah.
And when they came up with lethal injection, the U.S. temporarily had passed where executions were going to be public. And all of a sudden, someone's like, whoa, hang on. No one's going to want to give the death penalty if they're worried about watching an electric chair in their living room. We have to come up with another method. And so they came up with a method that would look as if
he's falling asleep.
And look very medically, even if you don't have to have doctors doing this.
Yeah.
And her book talks about the secretiveness of the process, that the executioners, whoever's involved in the execution team, releasing their information in Missouri is a felony and a fine. I could get in trouble if I even knew. Reporters can get in trouble. And I understand Missouri is one of the lowest paid Department of Corrections in the country. We have low paid state workers. We have 3 prisons down near, so Potosi Correctional Center is where the men are housed in Missouri. Bonne Terre Eastern ERDCC is where we execute them now. We started moving them from Potosi to Bonne Terre to execute them. And you're working around some people who there's not a lot of job options in rural Missouri. There's the Department of Mental Health, there's Department of Corrections, there's education, and there's a lot of big Walmarts in those areas. There's not a lot of jobs. It's an hour and 15 minutes south of St. Louis. Most people aren't driving an hour and 15 minutes up here, even if we had jobs.
Right.
And so you're asking people to do something. You're not asking if they're comfortable doing it. They don't get to say. I mean, I'm sure that at some point someone could try to say that their religious values, but would they be comfortable doing that in a state like Missouri? When you're in such a small area, everyone would know. I've had Department of Corrections people have spoken out against executions. This time with Lance, we had fewer speak out than before. There were some that spoke out in the clemency video. We know for a fact that there are people in Missouri Department of Corrections, both Catholic and non-Catholic, who oppose executions, who oppose it either for a specific person. They've seen that person change. They've seen that person. Brian Dorsey was a prison barber. The warden got their hair cut from this man. Do you think the warden would allow someone they deem dangerous with scissors cutting their hair?
Yeah.
I mean, I've had the prison barber at Potosi cut my hair for a couple of years. You go in, the prison barber cuts your hair, and you know that they're allowing someone safe with scissors. He had a death sentence, and they still let him. And they opposed Brian's execution, and not on an innocence claim, but on he has truly changed his life. And at one point then, as Catholics, either we believe that people can change, and we believe in the power of forgiveness and change, or we don't. That's not something in our faith. I'm new, correct me, sister.
No, you're good.
But that's not something where we halfway it.
That's right. That's right.
Like that is one of the real things that we can ask for forgiveness.
We bank on it. Yeah.
Right. And we bank on, so we can forgive other things, but this is the one that we can't. Now, I get a separation of church and state, and I appreciate that as an American and as a Catholic, that we have separation of church and state.
And you've given us a really great, deep understanding of how complex this issue really is.
It is.
So how does somebody who's listening take all of what you've just said, the enormity of it, and the kind of scary parts of it? I'm sure people are thinking, gosh, what? I don't know that I even understand anymore what I was thinking before this,
right.
So how do we, what do we do? What do we do out here?
Well, I think one, we have to remember that we can't give up on our government officials to do the right thing. I think right now it's really hard globally and in this country to look around and throw your hands up in the air. And I have texts from friends on a daily basis, like, this has happened and this has happened. And I think it's easy. We can't give up. We can't give up. At least I can't, because I have 5 more men living under a death sentence at Potosi. One of them just arrived there right before Thanksgiving on a new death sentence. He's 28, 29 years old. He will die in prison one way or another. And there's 5 men in total that are in appeals in Missouri right now. I can't give up hope, because I had men before me say my hope kept them going. That seemed that I wasn't giving up. Mm-hmm. And those were men who had done time in prison and been released. I think the other part, though, is when we start asking ourselves again, who are getting these sentences? Poor, often Black, mm-hmm. generally white victims. It's rare to receive a death sentence if your victim is Black, especially if you're African American. Now, here in St. Louis County, McCullough, Vincent McFadden is sitting at Potosi with 2 death sentences, 2 different victims, both African American. One of his co-defendant on one of the cases is not only out of prison, he's no longer on parole, and wow. McFadden is facing the needle. And those are the crimes where you sit and think, wait, is that the equal scales of justice? Is that what it is? For us, we need to not assume that the courts got it right.
Yeah. We know, if anyone listens to other podcasts, we hear over and over these real crime podcasts showing, and the Innocence Project, we know.
Yeah.
There are so many ways in which we've seen men, especially as you say, who have been in prison, maybe not even under a death sentence, but for 20, 30, 40 years yep. being proven innocent.
Yep. Because
technology changes, our ability to prove innocence changes. And isn't that then another reason to say, if there is any question, even if you still think, if there's any question, isn't it that there could be a way that we could prove the innocence of this person, or even confirm more their guilt? But we can't do that if we just execute them and completely eliminate.
Well, and in our justice system, I think that brings up 2 things, or the legal system. People are moving away from calling it a justice system, but right. I was still raised with the majority of my life. At 50, it's been justice system for so long. But when you sit and look at it and you think, we've been taught that our system is the best there is, and that's what keeps us safe a lot. And I think it's ingrained in us in this doctrine of not to question the system until more recently, as things have become public and technology. Ohio, just a week or 2 ago, another person was not executed, and I believe he was released. He was innocent. 1 in 8, I think, is what the number is of people under a death sentence, I believe is what it is. There's a high number of people who have not been guilty. But I think that's the other reason, right? The death penalty is the most final act of our justice system or of our legal system. You cannot have anything more final than the state murdering its own citizen.
Right.
And the evidence is no longer there then for even anyone to test, because we don't have this infinite space to keep evidence. The evidence gets destroyed.
Right, exactly. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So anything that could come.
Yeah.
And we certainly live in a world now where all things are possible.
Well, and we live in a world where people need snippets of quick information. And so you're not going to understand that Shockley never had a DNA. There was a hearing that his lawyers had asked for to test untested evidence for DNA. He never had his day in court for that hearing.
Right.
It was denied, and it was sitting before justices who had denied it when he was executed. He still had an appeal on the table for this untested DNA, and he was executed. I think most people assume the justice system works correctly. People get their day in court. You hear everything when you're a juror. And we know enough now that jurors don't hear everything,
right,
for various reasons. If I'm a defendant, there's often some things I may not want the jury to hear. And if I'm a victim, there's some things I'm upset that the jury didn't get to hear. That's why we have judges who are supposed to be ethical. Prosecutors should not be vindictive. And in Missouri, when our judges are often elected, our prosecutors are elected, what motive do they have then to do what is truly right and not try to secure their job?
Right.
And that's where, as voters, we need to be asking the hard questions as we go into a couple of election years. Let's not be afraid when you all ask someone if they're pro-life. Make sure they know you're talking about the death penalty too. Or only ask about the death penalty and separate the issue. Prosecutors matter. Judges matter. We are not getting any love, so to speak, from the court system in death penalty cases. And the same mechanism that they have used, that they used to overturn Roe v. Wade, they are now trying with the death penalty, and that is they're passing legislation. So they've passed legislation to expand the death penalty outside of just murder cases. Missouri has a bill. We had one last year. We have another one this year that they want to make it possible for someone to receive a death sentence if it's a child sex victim, but no death. Well, why would I keep the child alive then? Why would I leave a witness if I'm still going to end up with death?
That's the most frightening thing I've heard.
Second is we use a plea bargain system in this country. Our system would be so backed up if we didn't, to be honest. The death penalty is used by prosecutors to try to get people to plea out. It's a bargaining tool, for sure. But if I'm a child victim and the person's like, no, make the kid take the stand. Now I have to live with that forever, that this person was found guilty and is going to die because I spoke up?
Yeah.
That's a burden we want to put on our children, seriously. So Florida's already passed that law. They are trying people under death sentences that have not killed anyone. And they're going to try to make the courts then see if they're going to stick with the law of the land that it's been, only capital crimes. And I have family members who support the death penalty. I've ran across people who say, yeah, I don't want this person, but this crime's okay. Like in their brain, they can divide it up. I think every state that has an active death penalty has some organization such as us. There's Floridians Against Death Penalty Actions and Nationwide, the U.S. Campaign to End the Death Penalty. Catholic Mobilizing Network has this huge movement to help educate Catholics and help the Catholics have a voice against it. Organizations need money. Like, I hate to say that,
Sure, absolutely.
but we need, MADPMO is our website, but we need donations. We need donations from religious orders, from businesses, from individuals, and ongoing support so that we can fight the legislation. and we can go to Jefferson City and talk to legislators, but also so that we can fight for the men once they get a death sentence, and we can send holiday cards to them because now DOC does things differently and all of these things. Educating yourself and not realizing that we don't have to strong arm someone into thinking our beliefs. We just slowly have to ask them why they feel that way.
Yeah.
With the death penalty especially, they say, ask the person why they support it. And that will tell you what argument to go with, because financially the death penalty is more expensive.
Right?
There's a group called Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. I encourage you to look at their website. It gives conservative reasons to oppose the death penalty that are largely based in fiscal reasons. But the death penalty is more expensive. And people are like, oh, a bullet doesn't cost that much money. A piece of rope doesn't cost that much money. If I had $1 for every time I heard someone say something like that. And that is true. But we're not in the wild, wild west.
Right.
Like
exactly.
Realistically, from the moment a crime is deemed a death penalty crime, when the prosecutor or police are there, everything costs that county more money. You bring in experts, and the public defenders don't have the same amount of budget as the prosecutors. So we're costing the county taxpayers money. Now, Missouri is unique because we don't have death row. So for anyone who's seen A Green Mile, Just Mercy, Sister Helen, I just forgot, the Dead Man Walking. And I've been in Angola's death row. Missouri got rid of their death row in 1991. Our men are all at Potosi, but they're housed based upon their behavior. So like Lance had honor status. Vincent McFadden has honor status. They can have food visits. They can have jobs. And for someone who doesn't know how to behave, like Joseph Paul Franklin, who Missouri executed over a decade ago, he's locked up in administrative segregation, more like we would think of a death row. But that's because he didn't know how to behave in prison.
Sure.
He was threatening people. Again, back to we know how to handle people if we choose to. I encourage you, though, ask people, well, why do you support the death penalty? And truly listen to them. Because it'll take a while often to get someone to change unless they've had a personal experience.
Right.
There's victims groups out there, Journey to Hope, Violence to Healing. There's victims groups out there who oppose it, who give platforms for other victims. There's religious people. I think through the church, I think the priests aren't doing enough in their homilies to address it. My mass, my priest, the Sunday after Lance had been executed on Tuesday, talked about Lance Shockley's execution in his homily.
Good for him. Yeah.
And he called the crucifixion and execution my first visit to that church, which is why I joined. Because when you think about it, that's the execution we all talk about the most. And every time we look up there, Jesus wasn't, Jesus was wrongfully convicted. Even if he wasn't fighting his people, which most of our guys, and again, I'm not saying that the men being executed are Jesus or the Son of God, but they're not laying there fighting either. They are just saying, let's go.
Yeah.
I think if you have platforms to educate people or to bring in speakers about things, bringing those of us in, bringing in a victim, bringing those of us in who are comfortable talking about the issue, financial support and legislation.
There was a lot. And I know our listeners will be thinking and hopefully praying and hopefully then acting. Well, thank you. Thanks so much. And I just really appreciate you. And I'm so glad that the Lord has opened your heart so much. And thank you again for your deep, deep and very personal sharing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for selecting me.